Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast intended to help you sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when you're laying yourself down for a restful night? Does your mind spin and churn? Follow my voice down the path towards a restful night. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now, and which will probably be easier to solve with a solid night's rest. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns, but slowly letting go and drifting into the deep night, the restful sleep. Develop a mindset of focused relaxation rather than the spinning confusion many of us insomniacs face at night. Before we go any further together tonight, I need to take care of some business. It's the sort of thing that usually happens towards the end of most podcasts, but since I'm hoping you're asleep by the time we get that far, I need to mention the stuff now. Firstly, you can find the podcast, all episodes, as well as some blog posts and musings on the website sleepytimetales.net. Comments, questions, suggestions can all be emailed to contact@sleepytimetales.net. You can also find links to all the relevant social media there, but you can find the show on Twitter @SleepyTimeTales and our Facebook page at facebook.com/SleepyTimeTalesPodcast. There's also a channel on YouTube where I am uploading simple visualizer-enhanced versions of the episodes for your enjoyment. Search for Sleepy Time Tales Podcast or follow the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes and on the website is a link to the podcast newsletter. You can sign up and I will send you a weekly update with the latest episodes, blog posts, and maybe relevant specials or links to resources or stores that sell sleep aids, if I find anything that I think is worthwhile sharing. Now, if you're enjoying the show and or finding it useful, if it's helping you a couple of nights a week, or if you leave it running in the background so my droning voice can sing you to sleep, I would appreciate a little bit of support. I was going to hold off a few months on starting a Patreon because I wanted to have a body of work to justify it first, but they recently announced some changes that will make it more expensive and less useful for new creators starting campaigns after May 2019, so I figured I would just hold my nose and jump in and get started. So the show is free. What reason could you have to pay me for it? Well, there are a couple. Firstly, maybe you'd just like to. It's a service I provide mainly to help people out, and if you think that it's something you'd like to support and you're finding it useful, that may be reason enough. But I'm also happy to sweeten the pot for a little bit of support, so I do have some rewards levels available. There are 3 at the moment, and I'm keeping things simple. So if you can afford $1 a month, I will genuinely appreciate that. I live in a country where $1 is actually a usable amount of money, so if you want to back me at that level, I will, with your permission, list your name or alias on a thank you page on the Sleepy Time Tales website, sleepytimetales.net. Now, while a single $1 is genuinely a usable amount of money to me, add 4 more to that to make 5, and we have a very useful amount of money. To thank you for reaching that deeply, I will provide you with an RSS feed of episodes that don't have this section in it, where I'm rattling a can at you asking for your spare change. Also, while I don't currently have any advertising on the show, that may change in the future, and $5 and up patrons will receive ad-free episodes in their feed. If you really love what I do and can kick $10 a month in my direction, you will get an extra episode every month. I'll do a movie recap/review that will be chosen in a poll by users at the $10 or higher levels. That's assuming if I come up with something that I feel is worthwhile for higher level patrons, but now $10 is the cap. You can find the Patreon on patreon.com/sleepytimetales or on the website sleepytimetales.net/patron. If a monthly commitment is a bit much for you, I do have a tip jar up in the website, where you can throw a bit of spare change my way whenever you're so inclined. And again, I'll repeat myself, literally a single $1 is useful. If that's what you can afford and you feel it isn't going to help, be reassured it will, and it will be appreciated. Another way you can help without even costing yourself anything extra is checking out the affiliate links on many episodes and on the website. I link to items that are related to the theme of an episode in the show descriptions, and the website has links to sleep aid podcasts, appliances, and even some very nice looking beds, so go take a look if you're on the market. Also, if you're so inclined, please rate and review the podcast on whatever your podcast delivery service of choice is. The show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and SoundCloud, but of course you already know that because you've found it already. A 5-star review will get the show in front of more people, and the more people who find it, the more people I have a chance of helping to find a good night's sleep. Also, any interesting or funny reviews I get will be read out at the end of an episode, so there's a little bit of extra motivation for you. If this show helps you to find a good night's sleep, it may help others as well. So other than reviews, also please share this show on your social media or to your friends and family. It may even help others if it doesn't help you. Everyone who suffers sleepless nights is usually open to options that may work for them, even if it doesn't necessarily work for others. The music in this episode and all episodes thus far is Un Désert by Kumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they have some very cool stuff released under various different names that I recommend checking out. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is a sleep aid podcast? To answer your question, let me start with a common problem. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning in emotions and turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave and I'm your narrator, here to talk you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, I always struggled to sleep. I discovered far too late in life that droning male voices have a tendency to put me into a deep sleep. I learned this when I was listening to various podcasts at bedtime, or sometimes even during the day when I was at home because I was doing shift work. Eventually I found out that sleep podcasts are a thing. There are quite a lot that read old stories out, and even some for adults as well as many for children. I tried one that was quite special. It was specifically designed for the purpose of distracting the restless mind, so it was ideal for me. It's a show that's been around for a while, and it's called Sleep With Me. It worked very well for me, but when I recommended it to others, they didn't like the narrator's voice, and I hadn't been able to find anything else quite like it, so I wondered if I could make an alternative and make use of my own droning male voice, and here it is. This intro will go on for a few minutes as I explain the idea behind the podcast and why I think that listening to me will help you. Then after the intro, the story will begin. Before the story starts, maybe try to wind down, grab a glass of water, turn out the lights. Prepare yourself for the experience of sleeping as we prepare to go on a journey together to a restful night's sleep. Or maybe it's not a journey. Maybe it's more like we're building a space for you, a mental nest for you to settle into. The idea is that you listen to me closely as I tell you tonight's story, that you listen and stop the spinning mind that prevents you, like me, from having a restful night's sleep. Don't listen to me too closely unless you find me that fascinating, but the story I'm going to tell you is going to be a little bit confusing and boring and pointless, and hopefully it creates a state of mind of peaceful resignation, acceptance of the state of mind, a lack of resistance to the arms of sleep as they reach out to you. It's important, though, not to force it. Allow the process to happen naturally. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of my voice and allow the natural need to sleep to slowly wind you down. Listen to the sound of my voice as I tell you a tale. After a few weeks of experimentation, I've settled into something of a routine and plan with the episodes. I'm going to mix it up between original, mostly improvised stories, TV recaps, which at the moment are Twin Peaks, and recountings of events from mythology. Things like tonight's story of the Trials of Thor. So tonight we join the mighty god Thor and his brother Loki, probably played in your imagination by Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston respectively. Thank you, Marvel. So listen on if you want to hear a story about Chris Hemsworth wrestling an old lady who's actually old age. I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. Maybe it will take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you, and maybe one episode just isn't long enough. It's very important, though, that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights staring at the ceiling, it may take a while, maybe even a few days for this to work for you. It's like a muscle that you need to exercise to learn to focus and relax when you're trying to sleep. I'm going to assume here that this podcast goes undiscovered for a while. The chances of a bunch of people discovering it in its first few days, weeks, or months is pretty slim. If you've discovered it, I probably already have a bit of an archive for you to listen to. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in your week. And at the moment, I'm releasing a second episode every week to help build up an archive a little bit faster so that you, the listener, has a decent amount of stuff to leave running in the background, which is, as I'll explain a bit later, is something that I do personally with sleep aid podcasts, although not my own, because listening to myself is very distracting. So keep an eye out once you've subscribed, or an ear out maybe, and hear what's new stuff I release. So queue up a few episodes or just run through the backlog. What I do with sleep podcasts that I just hinted at is I just let them stream all night. I lie down in the dark with my earbuds in and let them run. Sometimes when I wake up at 3 a.m, the stream is still running and I let the voices waft me back to sleep. Sometimes it may be disconnected and so I need to start again. Sometimes I wake up 30 minutes before my alarm goes. Usually I carry on listening and it knocks me right back out. Let me tell you that 30 minutes is sometimes the most restful part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that just satisfies on a deep, deep level. So you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark. And while you do that, I tell you a tale. Some nights it may be a story I make up. Some nights it'll be me talking about a movie or TV show I find interesting. As I've said, I'm starting to settle into a bit of a content plan. I hate to use the word content, it sounds very new internet. But I'm starting to settle into a plan of things I can release quickly for your edification. If there are particular things that work for you, if you prefer TV recaps to original stories or want to hear more original stories or anything like that, or more mythology, just feel free to let me know. You can contact me through my social media or the email that I provided earlier. So lie there in the dark, let my voice wash over you, listen to things that you find interesting but try not to listen too closely. Stay engaged with the sound of the voice and the tale that I spin, but let yourself relax into my droning, sometimes croaky voice. I'll try my hardest not to be too interesting, which a lot of people tell you shouldn't be too hard. I do have the habit sometimes of going on and on about things that I find interesting, but nobody else does. And today I'm doing it for you, for your own good, dear listener. My nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark listening to my voice. That does seem a bit strange, doesn't it? Inviting me, a stranger from somewhere in the world, probably far away, to speak to you in your sleep, to speak you to sleep. But you'll always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe even not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after well-rested and better able to cope and process. I'm going to tell mostly feel-good stories, and if they're not so feel-good, I'll make a spin on them, because tonight's a story about gods and giants. Those tend towards violence, but I'm going to try take the edge off, because I don't want to be giving you nightmares. I want you to have good dreams. I'm also not going to focus on any of the bad parts of modern life that keep us awake. I'm going to try to make your life better, and even in small ways. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you, I want to share kindness with you. I want you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me in your ears trying to help. Forgive yourself. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. We can be frustrated as we just can't get below the edge of the sleep. We can't just quite pull the warm blanket of a restful night over our heads. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you and under you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy, but it is not your enemy. It is a natural process that we have been pulled away from by stress and life and progress, which shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a safe cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me except maybe in a dream. Let your dreams be about the story that I'm about to tell you now. The Trials of Thor. Thor decided to go visit one of the giants, the great lord Utgarda-Loki in the realm of the Giants Jotunheim. He went with his foster or half-brother Loki, and together they got into Thor's chariot, which was drawn by goats, and headed into the icy realms of Jotunheim, or headed towards the icy realms of Jotunheim. Records don't show why Thor and Loki decided to go pay a visit to one of their great enemies, because the Aesir, the gods of which Thor was one, and the Jotun, the giants as we call them in English, were great enemies. So yes, I don't know why they decided to make this journey, but they just did one day. Thor and Loki climbed onto the chariot, pulled by Thor's mighty goats, and headed into the deep, deep cold. As the journey continued, they came across one evening the home of a farmer, a farmstead with his family, a farmer with a farmstead, and his family of his wife and his 2 children, a son and a daughter. The Norse traditions of hospitality are quite strict and welcoming, and the farmer welcomed Thor and his brother, the mighty Thor, the god, and the trickster Loki into his home. In gratitude, Thor offered his goats for dinner for the meal, because Thor, with his power, and with Mjolnir, his mighty hammer, could resurrect the goats after eating them, so it really wasn't much of a burden for him. So the farmer and his wife and the children and Thor and Loki had a great meal. It was probably one of the better meals that the farmer and his wife had had. It's not often that they got that much meat all at once. Thor was quite strict about his instructions, though. The bones of the goats were to be very carefully collected and would be laid out on the goats' hides for the rest of the night. The farmer had 2 children, as I mentioned, his son Thialfi and daughter Roskva. Now, Thialfi was a growing boy and was not quite satisfied with the meal of the evening, so he broke open one of the goat's leg bones to eat the marrow, despite Thor's instructions that the bones were to be collected and placed undisturbed in the hides. So in the morning when Thor woke, he used his mighty hammer, hallowed the hides and the bones of the goats, which sprang to life as if they had never been eaten. It's quite a nice trick if you can do it, I guess. You'd be able to just, literally have your cake and eat it. To be able to eat the goats or anything else and bring them back to life. The problem was, one of the goats was lame. Thor knew immediately what had happened. He knew that somebody had broken his one instruction and broken one of the bones to get to the marrow. Thor was a powerful god, but extremely vicious and quick to anger and very vengeful. He would have struck down the farmer and his entire family for this transgression, but the farmer begged for his forgiveness, begged and offered his own children, including Thjalfi, who had done the crime in the first place, to work as Thor's servants. Thor paused in his anger and considered and decided to take the offer. I'm not sure that the children would have been much use for drawing his chariot, but servants were a good thing to have anyway, and he's Thor, I'm sure he could dig up some more goats as he needed. So he left the goats, including the lame one, with the farmer and his chariot. And Thor and Loki and Thjalfi and Röskva travelled further on foot. They proceeded for a very long time. Jotunheim was very far from Asgard and from Midgard. It was a great journey. They crossed a wide, vicious ocean, and they were deep in a tangled forest that seemed almost to be trying to prevent them from proceeding. They were very close to the realm of Jotunheim, and going was difficult. They were deep in the forest when the night fell, when they came across a giant hall, lying open with no door, deep and dark, but still dry and warm. In the darkness, they went into the hall and explored what they could. They found it had a large central section and 5 tunnels that went out into dead ends. But they all stayed together in the main hall to stay together because they were in unfamiliar territory, and as I said, the giants and the gods were great enemies. It was late in the night, in fact, probably close to sunrise. Light was dark, the sky was lightening a little bit when suddenly there was a great earthquake. It shook awake Thor and his companions, and they ran out of the hall in panic. Outside they saw quite a sight. They came across a sleeping giant, massive and huge, far larger than Thor or his companions, or Thor and his companions all put together. Thor hated the giants greatly. So, again, I'm not too sure exactly why they were going to visit Utgarda-Loki, and I guess I'd say probably to go destroy the castle and slay the king and all of his companions. So, yeah, that was probably it, because the first thing Thor decided to do as soon as he came across the sleeping giant, who just happened to be snoring loudly enough to create an earthquake, was walk up to him with his hammer, the mighty Mjolnir, and prepare to kill him. As he prepared to smite the giant, his eyes awoke, and he saw Thor and his companions. The giant was quite amused by the tiny little creatures, the mighty god Thor, as he thought himself, and his brother Loki, and the 2 human children. He was quite amused, but he told them he would travel with them to Jotunheim to help them get to the castle of Utgarda-Loki. He stood up, and he bent down and he picked up what they had thought was the great hall in which they had slept, but it was merely the giant's glove. He put on his glove and went with Thor and his group, and they left on their journey. They travelled far that day. The giant offered to help and carried all of Thor and his group's provisions in his bag over his shoulder. Thor was suspicious, but the giant, despite being tickled apparently by the tiny size of the gods and humans, seemed willing and happy to help. They travelled on all day until the sun set, and when night fell, they decided to rest underneath a giant oak. The oak was so giant that even the massive giant Skrymir, incidentally, I forgot to mention his name, could fit underneath. The giant put down his bag with the party's provisions and promptly fell asleep. Thor and his companions needed to eat and get some provisions out, so Thor went to open the giant's bag. He could not open the knot to Skrymir's bag to get to their supplies. It was impossible. In his great anger, Thor took his hammer and struck the giant on his head. The giant mumbled, moved slightly in his sleep, opened his eyes, and didn't even seem to notice Thor with the hammer. "Oh, what happened? Did a leaf fall on me?" he asked. "That's quite strange. Just such a little tickle in my sleep." The giant fell back to sleep. Thor was aghast and humiliated. He knew he was the mightiest of the gods, and he had put everything he could besides the blow behind the blow, yet nothing happened. His mightiest strike was accused of being a falling leaf. So embarrassed, he went and they lay and they fell asleep. But the giant once again began to snore. Now remember, the night before, the snore had woken up Thor and his companions because they thought it was a whole earthquake. So obviously, they knew it now that it wasn't an earthquake and no danger, but they weren't getting any sleep. So Thor, in his frustration, once again picked up his hammer and struck the sleeping giant on the head. Again, Skrymir, the massive giant, moved in his sleep and blearily opened his eyes, didn't even seem to notice Thor, except to ask him, "What just happened? Did an acorn fall on my head? Something bumped me and it disturbed my sleep." Thor again was aghast and embarrassed and retreated back to the fire with the rest of his companions. He sat staring at the sleeping giant, who was quieter now and didn't snore, but he was very frustrated. For no particular reason, Thor decided to make one more go at striking the giant. Just before sunrise, he got up again, took his hammer one more time, and struck the giant on the head. This time, Skrymir stirred, opened his eyes, sat up, and looked into the branches of the trees. "I wonder what that was," he said. "Did the bird come home to roost and knock some sand on my face? I could definitely feel something in my sleep." It was almost time to leave, so Skrymir didn't go back to sleep. He got up, opened the bag, gave some provisions to Thor and his companions. Well, returned their provisions to them, rather, because he had to go in a different direction. He bade them a friendly, if slightly rude farewell. Well, hard to say it was openly friendly, but he still called Thor little man, and he was otherwise quite insulting with a cheery grin on his face, and he sent Thor and his companions on their way. Skrymir departed, heading north. The rest of the group went to Castle Utgard, which wasn't far. They reached Utgard around midday. The doors were firmly locked and there was no one there to let them in, but they found they could fit between the bars, because it seemed to be more designed around keeping giants out than much smaller creatures like mere puny gods. They explored the castle and followed the noise that they heard, and they found the main hall, where they came across a whole group of men eating and drinking. The king of the castle, Utgarda-Loki, who they had come to see, recognized his guests and immediately started teasing them about their small size. Now, I mean, to call gods small is quite a thing, because compared to humans, they were really large, but a giant's a giant and a god's a god, and giants are really big, or at least so they seemed. So Utgarda-Loki mercilessly teased the gods Thor and Loki and their human companions. To salvage some pride, Loki decided to challenge one of the giants to an eating competition. Loki claimed that he had the greatest of all appetites and could out-eat any one of the giants in the room. Utgarda-Loki liked the sound of this, and they got a huge trough, the sort of thing that cattle gets fed over, and they filled it up with meat, all sorts of cuts and bones and ribs and legs and haunches. Filled it up completely, and the challenge was simple. Utgarda-Loki nominated one of his companions, one of his henchmen, or can't think of a good term for it, one of his clansmen. He said, "My clansman here will start at one end, while you, puny god, will start at the other, and the first person to reach the middle of the trough will be the winner and will be proven to have the greatest appetite." So Loki and the giant began eating at the same time. It was quite an impressive feat of consumption by Loki, especially in the 21st century where eating competitions are a thing. He just consumed, he wolfed down the food like crazy, and he reached the middle. But he reached the middle at the same time as the giant. So, who won the competition? They stopped and they looked at the trough, and they saw that Loki had picked the bones of everything he'd eaten clean, but the giants had consumed the bones and the trough even, and there was nothing remaining. So while they both got to the same place, the giant obviously was the winner because he had eaten far more. Thjalfi, who felt bad about the situation with the goat still, he was a nice boy and just a little bit rash, he claimed to be an extremely fast runner. So he stood forward and he claimed that he was the fastest runner in the room and he could outrun any of Utgarda-Loki's companions. Utgarda-Loki was quite impressed with the young man, the young boy, and accepted the challenge. He called out one of his companions and said, "You shall race." Thjalfi and the giant raced along the track, but the giant was so much faster that he reached the end of the race and came back to Thjalfi to finish the race alongside him. Thjalfi demanded a second try, and once again the giant beat him by a full longbow shot. That's what the story says. I don't know exactly what that is, but I'm assuming it's quite far. Thjalfi went best from three. I demand one further race. And he got it. This time, though, the giant finished the race when Thjalfi wasn't even halfway yet, and stood waiting for him to get there. Embarrassed by the poor showing of his companions, Thor decided to step up and make a challenge himself. He challenged them to a drinking contest. Now, while the giants had been drinking all day, they did provide Thor with one of their great horns, a drinking horn that they told any one of them could finish in a single drink. It was a mighty horn indeed, and Thor lifted it up and took a deep draught and drank until he had to release his breath. He looked into the horn, and it hadn't even moved. He tried one more time. He drank until it felt like his eyes were going to fall out, and he couldn't fit anymore, and he had to breathe. And he looked again, and he saw that the level had gone down a little bit, but the horn was still very, very full. So he let out a belch and made some room and had one third try. Again, he drank until he couldn't carry on anymore. He stopped and he looked in the horn, and he saw it had barely moved again. Utgarda-Loki seemed almost embarrassed on behalf of Thor, so he offered him another chance to prove his might. He pointed at his cat sitting on the rug in front of the fire and said, "Just pick up my cat, and then we'll believe that you're as mighty as you say." Thor went to pick up the cat, which barely even reacted to him. He managed to get his hands underneath it and lifted it barely, like the cat just drooped around his hands and remained on the ground while he managed to slightly lift part of it, but it was too heavy for him. Thor was very surprised. It was a very ordinary looking cat, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't pick it up. Utgarda-Loki said, "All right then. You can't drink as well as we can, and you can't even lift my cat, but maybe you can do well in a wrestling match." He called over an old woman who'd been cooking by the fire and said, "So if you successfully wrestle my mother, I'll believe you about your might." While the old lady was a giant, she was also an old lady, so Thor was even embarrassed at the suggestion, but he couldn't back down. So he and the old lady gripped on each other and wrestled. But she threw him down and held him down with no effort at all, completely humiliated him. At this point, Utgarda-Loki said, "We will have no further contests. We have seen quite enough, and while you may think you're mighty in your world, unfortunately, God Thor rather, you and your brother and your humans are not very impressive in the world of the giants. So rest for tonight, and tomorrow you can leave." So Thor and his companions retreated to a room that had been provided to them and slept through the night. In the morning, Utgarda-Loki took Thor and his companions out of the castle and wandered a small distance away when Utgarda-Loki decided to tell Thor exactly what had happened. "I had heard news of your coming, and I decided to come and meet you out on the road. That giant Skrymir who you met was actually me. I came to meet you and see if I could prevent your arrival and to get a sense of who and what you were. So I came out and met you on the road and decided to keep an eye on you. The knot on the bag when you tried to get the provisions was wrought out of iron, and was, although you are indeed a mighty god, untying an iron rope was impossible for you. When you struck me on the head those 3 times, I managed to use my powers to deflect those blows into a mountainside. So every time you hit me, you weren't hitting me, you were actually hitting a mountain. Each blow carved a valley into the mountain, a massive valley, and if one had struck me, I would not have survived. Loki, even the greatest appetite cannot beat the appetite of fire, because that was your opponent. Fire consumes everything fast, and even a mighty god with a powerful appetite couldn't beat that. He turned to the young man Thjalfi. You indeed are a great runner, and probably would be faster than any of my giants. But even you at your great speed could not possibly beat you cannot be faster than thought. Thought defeats all because thought is all. He then turned to Thor, and you, mighty Thor, although I called you puny for your small size, you were very terrifying to us. The horn that I gave you was connected to the ocean, and while you drank and it seemed the level of the horn hardly went down, you drank deep draughts of the ocean, and as you return home you will see how much of it has disappeared. The cat that you couldn't pick up was in fact the Midgard serpent that encircles the earth. You managed to pull it out of the sea and into the sky, but couldn't obviously pull it off the side of the earth because that would be too much even for your great might. And the old lady, the giantess that I called my mother, was in fact old age. And old age cannot be defeated by any, including giants or gods. So your fight was in vain, and you did better than could have been possibly expected. Thor turned away from a second to try to compose himself, but he couldn't. His rage was great, and he swung around, holding his hammer, ready to smite and slay Utgarda-Loki and smash his castle. But they were all gone, and he never saw them again. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Sleepy Time Tales podcast. The Sleeper 8 podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night, and at the moment I'm releasing bonus episodes a second time during the week to help build up a little bit of an archive so that you, the listener, can have a full night's worth of stories to leave running in the background, because that's what I find works for me, so I'm hoping to leave it as an option for you. So keep an ear out and an eye out on however you've subscribed, and stuff will be coming out quite regularly. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku from the Free Music Archive. Check out more of their work on their website and their Patreon, which you will find linked in the show notes. So good night, sweet dreams, and see you again soon.